Tonight on Primetime, as global tensions tighten around one of the world's most vital shipping routes, leaders are gathering in Paris for urgent talks aimed at restoring stability. With energy markets on edge and supply chains under strain, the summit is focusing on securing maritime routes and preventing further escalation in a crisis already rippling far beyond the region. So can diplomacy keep the oil flowing? Welcome to the program. I'm Andy Miocz. World leaders are meeting in Paris today, trying to ease pressure on a crisis that's now hitting energy markets and global trade. The focus is clear: how to secure one of the world's most critical shipping lanes without pushing tensions even further. Leaders in Paris are working to address the growing disruption around the Strait of Hormuz as concerns mount over energy supplies and global trade. The talks are centered on restoring safe passage and coordinating an international response to stabilize a situation with far-reaching economic consequences. But beyond the immediate priority, there's a broader question: how to prevent this from escalating into a prolonged disruption with deeper consequences for the global economy. Britain and France are preparing a European-led mission to protect shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, but only once tensions between the United States and Iran ease in a lasting way. The move comes as Tehran signals the route is reopening, though uncertainty remains over how and when such a mission would begin. AnewZ's Ollie Barrett has the latest.
The UK and France say they will lead what will be a defensive mission in the Strait of Hormuz when conditions allow. And what they and their allies mean by that is when there is a cessation in hostilities between the US and Iran, which can be viewed as something fairly permanent. Now, there are a number of countries, they say, that will contribute to this mission in the forms of vessels that can escort ships, the mine-sweeping capability that might be required as well. Of course, the summit that the UK and France have been co-hosting in Paris, and a virtual meeting for many of the attendees, came as Iran said that it was opening the Strait of Hormuz to all commercial shipping. That has received a cautious welcome from those gathered in Paris and meeting online, and those European leaders like Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, and French President Emmanuel Macron have said that any passage through the Strait of Hormuz for shipping must be completely condition-free. They say there should be no tolls attached to movement of shipping, and that they want to see it restored in the way that it was before the Iran conflict broke out. President Trump also taking to social media while the summit was wrapping up in Paris to suggest that he believes there is no need for the mission that is being discussed in Paris, but France and the UK believe it can become an important part of the post-conflict period. What will happen next is that here in the UK, at the Northwood military base next week, military planners will gather again to try and put some real detail on the logistics of how this mission would play out. But as I say, it won't be something that is launched until those contributing countries are sure that the conditions in the Strait of Hormuz and the region are in the right place. Ollie Barrett in London for AnewZ.
Well, joining me now is Alexander Seal, a UK-based correspondent specializing in French and British politics. Alexander, welcome. Great to have you on Primetime. Sure. Now, as the leaders were gathering at the AnewZ, Iran declared the Strait of Hormuz is open for the remainder of the ceasefire. Macron and Starmer welcomed the opening, saying they'll continue working on the international mission. Now, in your mind, what does this Paris gathering hope to achieve in practical terms?
Yes, it wasn't a breakthrough summit. It's It was a coordination summit aimed at organizing a coalition response rather than resolving the crisis itself. There were three realistic objectives here. First, protecting global shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, which is one of the most critical choke points for energy and trade. So even limited disruption has global consequences. And second, demonstrating that there is a broader international coalition willing to defend freedom of navigation. That's important both for deterrence and for market confidence. And third, preparing the groundwork for a possible multinational maritime framework, including things like escorts, intelligence sharing, and mine clearance, if the situation stabilizes. So this is not about resolving the crisis directly, it's about organizing the international response around it.
Well, you've mentioned this word coalition a couple of times there. When we look back at previous cases historically, do these coalitions actually produce some effect, or is this maybe more about coordination and optics?
I think they tend to do both, but on different timelines. In short term, they are about coordination, aligning positions, avoiding divisions between allies, and sending a unified political signal. In the longer term, they can translate into real measures, whether that's sanctions, naval deployment, or operational planning. What's notable here is that this follows a pattern we've seen recently with flexible coalitions, like the Coalition of the Willing on Ukraine, which operate alongside formal institutions and can move more quickly. So yes, there is an element of optics, but these formats can still be effective because they create the conditions for action.
But when you look at the leaders gathered in Paris and the lineup of countries, none of these states is part of those core negotiations. How much of pressure can they exert on this situation? How much can they impact the Middle East war?
Yes, their influence is indirect, but still quite significant. They can shape the broader environment through sanctions, economic pressure, maritime security, and diplomatic signaling. In a situation like the Strait of Hormuz, where global trade and energy flows are involved, that influence can be particularly strong, especially when it comes to shipping, insurance, and market stability. So they're not deciding the outcome of the conflict itself, but they are shaping the costs and the incentives around it, which can have a real impact.
One of these countries leading the way is, of course, the United Kingdom. London has so far stepped back from any practical enforcement of measures. How do you view this balancing act between being involved in any way and this very concrete actions that the US wanted from London but didn't get?
Yes, the UK is trying to strike a careful balance between engagement and restraint. On one hand, it wants to be seen as an active and credible security actor working with partners to protect shipping and stability. On the other hand, it is avoiding steps that would make it a direct party to escalation, particularly anything that could be seen as enforcement or confrontation. What's also interesting is the broader context. Despite Brexit, the UK is still working very closely with European partners on security issues. We've seen that with Ukraine through the Coalition of the Willing, and this summit today reflects a similar model of flexible cooperation outside formal EU structures. So Brexit has changed the format of cooperation, but not the substance.
You mentioned a bit earlier that this summit might have some indirect impact to the situation surrounding the war in the Middle East. Would you say that the focus of this gathering is making such an impact, or just showing these leaders that they are actually engaged in these global issues, that they aren't sidelined fully?
Yes, it's both, but at this stage, the signaling is slightly ahead of the substance. Leaders clearly want to show they are engaged and coordinated, and that has real value in itself, particularly for markets and international confidence. But the real impact will depend on whether this coordination translates into concrete measures, whether that's maritime operations, sanctions, or longer term security arrangements. So it's not where the crisis will be resolved, but it does play an important role in shaping how the response develops. And for Emmanuel Macron, the French president, this fits a familiar pattern. He uses summit diplomacy to position France at the center of international responses. But there is also a domestic context. His room for maneuver at home is more constrained, so foreign policy becomes a key space where he can protect authority and leadership. Hosting a summit like this today allows him to look presidential and reinforce France's role as a major diplomatic actor. So this is about showcasing unity now and trying to turn that unity is leverage if the situation moves towards a de-escalation.
Alexander, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your insights.
Thank you.
And after the break, we will take a look at the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon and why questions remain over whether it can hold. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. A ceasefire is in place between Israel and Lebanon, but even before it took effect, cracks were showing. A 10-day pause has been agreed, yet with key conditions unresolved. The question is whether this holds or unravels quickly.
A 10-day ceasefire agreement has been reached between Israel and Lebanon. US President Donald Trump said the truce will take effect on Thursday, marking a temporary pause in the ongoing conflict between Israel and the Iran-backed Hezbollah.
I think they will. I think it's going to be, actually it's very exciting because it's 48 years. We're going to be meeting with Bibi Netanyahu, as you know, and the president of Lebanon. And I had a great talk with both of them today. They're going to be having a ceasefire, and that'll include Hezbollah. And I think it could be number 10 for me. I think we will have an agreement between Lebanon, and they're going to take care of Hezbollah. But they're going to be working on Hezbollah right now. But we'll have an agreement between Israel, very importantly, and Lebanon.
Will you support our debate?
However, significant differences remain between the parties. The Israeli army has said it does not plan to withdraw from southern Lebanon during the ceasefire. Hezbollah, in turn, stated that any deal must not allow Israeli forces freedom of movement inside Lebanese territory.
In these peace talks, we have two fundamental demands. First, the disarmament of Hezbollah. Second, a sustainable peace agreement, peace through strength. In order to achieve the ceasefire, Hezbollah insisted on two conditions. The first condition was that Israel must withdraw from all Lebanese territory up to the international border. The second condition was a ceasefire based on a quiet-for-quiet arrangement. I did not agree to either of these, and indeed neither of these conditions is being met. We are remaining in Lebanon in a reinforced security zone. This is not the 5 points that existed before Roaring Lion. It is a security zone that begins at the sea and extends to Mount Dov and the foothills of Mount Hermon up to the Syrian border. It is a security zone 10 kilometers deep, which is way stronger, way more powerful, way more continuous, and way more solid than what we had before.
The conflict escalated on March 2nd after Hezbollah launched attacks in support of Tehran. Since then, Israeli strikes have killed thousands in Lebanon and forced hundreds of thousands of civilians to flee their homes. Fighting continues, particularly in southern Lebanon, with heavy clashes reported in the strategic town of Bint Jabal. Israel has said it aims to establish a security zone in the area. Despite ongoing diplomatic efforts, the situation remains highly fragile and it is unclear whether the ceasefire will hold. Hezbollah said on Thursday that the presence of Israeli troops in Lebanon grants the group and the Lebanese people the right to resist, stressing that any ceasefire must not allow Israel freedom of movement within the country. Nabi Berri, Speaker of the Lebanese Parliament and an ally of Hezbollah, urged residents to delay returning to their towns and villages until the situation becomes clearer and the terms of the ceasefire are finalized.
While some families are returning to their homes, others remain displaced and say they are waiting for a lasting ceasefire before deciding to go back in southern Lebanon. Residents began making their way back as the 10-day ceasefire with Israel took hold, as convoys carrying belongings moved through heavily damaged roads and villages. In Nabatea and nearby areas, people crossed rubble-strewn streets and destroyed infrastructure, with some waving victory signs as they returned. Despite the ceasefire, much of the region remains heavily damaged and still undergoing clearance. Some residents say they are relieved to be back, while others remain cautious about returning.
We're here thanks to these heroic young men, and we stayed here, in our hometown with our livelihoods and all that. What could we do? Thank God the war ended thanks to these heroic young men, the fighters.
Let the war officially stop, that's it. At that point we will return. But now, no, I'm telling you, we won't return until the war stops and they withdraw from all Lebanese territory.
Let's now bring in Dr. Nurhan El-Bayah, professor at Istanbul Aydin University and a consultant with the United Nations Development Program, joining us from Istanbul. Nurhan, welcome. Thank you for coming on Primetime. Now, this ceasefire is being presented as a breakthrough, but when you look at the details, at the fine print, so to say, how fragile does it appear on the ground?
Let me just start. Let me go back a little bit to that negotiation table in Washington. It was at ambassadorial level. It was the first time that there was a direct negotiation in more than 3 decades. I have observed what happened at that day. I can say clearly that it was not successful. Basically because Israel controlled the narrative at that negotiation, at that day. From the first round, it's supposed both of them announced a joint statement. It shouldn't be like this from the first time. Such negotiations supposed to be behind closed doors. After that, both sides supposed to announce position announcement separately. That's it, as simple as that. But what happened was something totally different. It seemed to us that Lebanon is working collaboratively with Israel. They are like working together. Lebanon is working with Israel to destroy part of their populations. By the end of the day, Hezbollah is part of the Lebanese population. So that's why it wasn't, from my point of view, it wasn't that much successful. Let's now move to the recent ceasefire. The ceasefire agreement of yesterday, it's significant, but it leaves lots of unanswered questions. Trump, the American president, Donald Trump, he invited President On and the Prime Minister Netanyahu to Washington to seal sort of agreement. But what about Hezbollah? Hezbollah is part of this war. It's warring party, actually. But when it comes to the involvement of Hezbollah in negotiation, it's zero. We can say it clearly. No presence for Hezbollah in these ongoing negotiations. Here also we have two important questions. Will Iran instruct, because now we are talking about zero presence of Hezbollah, so here will Iran instruct Hezbollah in case of ceasefire agreement implemented to stop attacking or bombing? This is the first question. The second question, which is the most important question, will Israeli troops withdraw from south of Lebanon or not?
Exactly.
Those
There is a clear
will
disagreement.
remain.
Sorry to interrupt you, but there's a clear disagreement even with this truce. The disagreement lies with the presence of Israeli troops in Lebanon. Would you say that might be the most significant factor in this truce equation?
Definitely, absolutely, of course. Because here the issue, both sides, Lebanon or Hezbollah and Israel, both of them, they see this issue, which is the presence of Israeli troops in south, from totally different point of views or different perspectives, let's say. Israel sees this as defensive, as security for them, because the presence of Hezbollah, especially in southern of Al-Litani River, is threatening Israel. But let's now talk about Hezbollah sides. Hezbollah sees the presence, and also Lebanese side definitely, sees the Israeli troops' presence in south as threat, as violation, actually. So both of them, they are operating under, let's call it, fundamentally incompatible understanding of ceasefire. So
Nurhan,
as long as...
Now do you say that Hezbollah has said if Israeli troops remain in Lebanon, that gives them the right to resist. Does that keep the door open for renewed clashes, a renewed start of the war?
Absolutely, because Hezbollah preserves strategic ambiguity in terms of their response to the current or the recent ceasefire. At the same time, Hezbollah is raising the voice of the right to resist. So this is very crucial for them, of course, for Hezbollah in this phase now. And even they stated that earlier today that we will be ready always for what might happen. For example, earlier today in the morning, despite the ceasefire, Israel bombed a couple of villages in south of Lebanon, because Israel, from their perspective, Hezbollah would be hidden, might be in schools or inside an ambulance or in a mosque.
Exactly in that vein, we're hearing warnings from the Israeli side for the civilians not to come back there yet. Now, behind all of these statements, we're hearing all the diplomatic advances and so on. What does that tell us of the reality of this ceasefire?
In Lebanon, even, they are in the same situation. Displaced Lebanese, since yesterday night, they started to flee towards south of Lebanon, towards their villages, towards their lands, despite the fact of they know very well that Israel demolished entire villages, especially those villages located in southern of Al-Litani River. So they just flee back to their lands and to their houses, and lots of warnings from the Lebanese government, also from Hezbollah yesterday night. They announced lots of warnings to those not to return back to their villages. But here we can realize a gap between the reality, the humanitarian reality, which shows us that those villages now are no longer a proper place to live, and the media show of having agreement of ceasefire and the ability and the willing to have sustainable peace between Lebanon and Israel, because those people are close to the reality. Those people who announced warnings since yesterday to Lebanese people, those people are on the ground. They can see the reality in south of Lebanon very well.
And of course, this is a very fluid situation. The truce has only just begun. But looking ahead, Nurhan, what do you believe needs to be done? What steps do the sides have to take for this temporary truce to evolve into a lasting ceasefire, maybe something more sustainable even?
To achieve this, which is, or to solve this issue and to achieve a sustainable peace between Lebanon and Israel, I think they have to solve three issues. Number one, clarity on Israeli troops' presence in south of Lebanon. This is so crucial because Israel, they already created what they call it buffer zone. This buffer zone took the whole area in southern of Al-Litani River from the sea till the Syrian borders. So this is so crucial. Number two, they have to reach to mutually accepted, we can say it, maintaining mechanism for violations, especially in south of Lebanon. It might be with support of international organizations, same as United Nations. The third point from my perspective is Hezbollah's presence and posture in south of Lebanon. They have to solve this not only from military perspective, also from politically perspective. They have to solve that posture in Hezbollah in a way or another, and this is directly the responsibility of the Lebanese government.
Nurhan, thank you kindly for joining us on Primetime and sharing your views.
Thank you.
And now let's bring in Ken van Yerland, a data entrepreneur and geopolitical commentator focusing on the Middle East. Ken, welcome. Great to have you on the program. Now, not even 2 hours ago, we've heard from the U.S. President Donald Trump, and he said, let me get a quote here. He said, Israel will not be bombing Lebanon any longer. They are, caps lock, prohibited from doing so by the USA. Enough is enough. What do you make of that?
Well, it's rhetoric. It's comfortable rhetoric. You know, Netanyahu and Trump, they don't deal with each other in that way. And it's part of a broader game already for a long time. Of course, the Americans, they want to finish this war by opening the Strait of Hormuz and getting a better position for themselves. And Trump wants to be the winner of this war. And yet the other hand, Iran is playing the game that they still can pull the strings of the puppet in Lebanon. You know, Hezbollah has been a proxy army for Iran for a very long time, and they want to keep their puppets in place. And from the Israeli point of view, Lebanon is a pain in the ass already for a long, long time. And it is not acceptable for the Israelis that Hezbollah keeps on playing their cards like they have been playing it for a very long time. So something has to change. And what we see today is that there is a ceasefire, which is a tactical step in a process where, at the end of the day, Lebanon should become, well, in a situation that they can control their own country, and which is not the case. The Lebanese government is a lame duck for a long time. In order to become the Switzerland of the Middle East again, which they were in the past, it's important to get rid of Hezbollah. And that's what we're facing. This is a technical situation where the Lebanese government and the Israelis should become part of the Abraham Accords and sign a peace agreement between both countries for the first time in 75, 80 years, because they are still in war with each other. Theoretically, and because they've never fought each other, only in 1948. But since then, the Lebanese have never exchanged any fire with the Israelis or vice versa. There's always been somebody else in between. In 1982, there was a war between the Fedayeen from Yasser Arafat. That jeopardized the country dramatically. That's why we had a civil war. And then in 1982, I was part of that because we invaded Lebanon with 70,000 soldiers in order to get rid of Yasser Arafat and his Fedayeen. And we retreated in 2000, and then Hezbollah came in place. And since then, we have been fighting them once in a tit-for-tat game for many, many years.
Well, can you say you were there? When you look at what's happening right now with Israel saying, okay, we are not leaving southern Lebanon, how does that fit into Israel's idea of a broader strategical security?
Well, the only thing that the Israelis want is to get peace at their borders. You know, Hezbollah is on the border with Israel and launching rockets, mortar grenades, and using anti-tank missiles to harass the Israelis continuously. You know, and after 7th of October, on the 8th of October, Hezbollah participated in this tit-for-tat game for no reason. For the only reason, because there's no dispute between Lebanon and Israel about territory or something else. There's nothing in dispute. The only reason why Hezbollah got involved is because Tehran told them to do so. And they've launched thousands and thousands of missiles on the northern part of Israel. More than 100,000 Israeli citizens, they got somewhere else because they couldn't live there anymore. In 1982, I've been there for many years. They pummeled us with grenades and all kinds of grenades and missiles or whatsoever, day after night and day after day. It just was unbearable. And then we invaded in 1982 in the war in order to get rid of Yasser Arafat and all the Fedayeen. It's a rehearsal. It's a rehearsal of the same situation that we're fighting an enemy in Lebanon, not against the Lebanese, not against Lebanon. It's against Hezbollah and the terrorists that they are trying to harass the Israelis, and they're trying to get rid of it.
Well, someone might say that more than 2,200 people were killed in Lebanon, more than 1 million displaced. Maybe they're not all Hezbollah, but let's get back to the point of the disagreement here. Israel obviously wants Hezbollah disarmed. How realistic is that to happen in the current circumstances, and who could provide that service?
Well, the fact actually is that so many people died. That happens in wars, People die in wars. We're not playing pool. It's a war and people die. But predominantly Shiites, not Christians. It's crowded with Christian villages in the southern part of Lebanon. We don't hurt them. We hurt the Shiites, and we drove away the Shiites away, like we did with the people in Gaza. We drove them away in order to get them rid of the borders, and that's part of this war. You're fighting fanatics, and they keep on coming. Hezbollah is a fact, and that you cannot ignore. But the only way is that the Lebanese, in coordinates with the Israelis, are able to curtail the Shiites and the Hezbollah. That's the only way forward. You have to root them out. That's the only way forward. You have to root them out. You can't negotiate with people that come to kill you. No way. Because they hate us more than they love their own children. And that's the fact.
Well, what would you say that Donald Trump might say to such a view if it does indeed prevail in Israel that the fight must go on until the end? What do you say Washington might do in a situation like that if the fighting does indeed renew?
Well, the Americans have a different geopolitical ambition, right? They want to curtail Iran. They have a different goal. They have different ambitions. The Israelis have an existential fight in that area, fighting Hamas, fighting Hezbollah, fighting the Houthis, fighting all the extremists that we're all suffering from in the Middle East. And it's a partial game. I mean, you take out Hamas, you take out Hezbollah piecemeally, and that takes time. It really takes time. But it would be very positive for the Israelis if the Lebanese government would join the Israelis under the governance of the Americans to draw up a plan like the Abraham Accords, that we all agree that there needs to be a peace between both countries. That's what we all want. But we have a mutual agreement that we need to get rid of Hezbollah. And the only way to get rid of Hezbollah, Hezbollah is not only a group of people. It's the entire Shiite population that's part of Hezbollah. Because Hezbollah doesn't come from Pluto, they come from the Shiite population. And the fact is that the Shiite population support Hezbollah and vice versa. You have to get rid of the whole bunch. And where they go, nobody knows. Maybe they go to Syria, to Aleppo, where all the Shiites live over there. That's
a very dangerous.
There are no other options.
That's a very dangerous conflation, Ken. What would you say is
presumably, but do you see another solution? Because if the Shiites stay in the southern part of Lebanon, you will see that will come back again and again and again and again. Because they are, from a theocratic point of view, they think they have to fight the Israelis because the Jews. That's the only reason. It's a theocratic ambition that they pursue. It's because they're against the Jews.
Well, I'd like to hear your thoughts, Ken, on one more thing. What does victory look like for Israel right now? Is it a lasting peace with Lebanon, or is it something else?
Well, there is no solution. The only way what you can do is to manage the situation. That's the maximum ambition that you should pursue, what the Israelis are pursuing. They currently have a 10-kilometer ceasefire zone, buffer zone, but that's not enough because the missiles that they possess can easily reach them from 40 or 50 kilometers. Well, the first step in the game is to get an accordance between the Lebanese and the Israelis, a coalition of the willing, that they want peace with each other. That would be unique because in 80 years' time, the Lebanese and the Israelis are able to sign a peace agreement. The second step in the game is how do we control Hezbollah from a way that they will not pose any danger to both countries, to the Lebanese and to the Israelis, and to diminish the whole situation. And it's a step-by-step approach, like with Hamas in Gaza, is how do we disarm them and how do we neutralize this danger? And that's it. And that can only happen in a joint accordance under the governance of the United States, that we make a step-by-step by step process in neutralizing Hezbollah.
Well, Ken, thank you for coming on and sharing your views.
Okay, thank you very much for having me.
Now, after the break, we will be taking a look at warnings that Europe could face a jet fuel shortage within weeks as supply disruptions continue. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Europe could run short of jet fuel within about 6 weeks if global supply disruptions persist. The International Energy Agency has warned. IEA Executive Director said tensions in the Middle East, particularly risks to flows through the Strait of Hormuz, could trigger one of the most severe energy crises in history. He warned that prolonged disruption of oil and gas shipments could push up fuel, electricity, and transport prices, and may even lead to flight cancellations with wider knock-on effects for global inflation and growth. Now let's bring in Shoaib Boutamin, Senior Energy Advisor and CEO of Iranadrill Energy. Shoaib, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on Primetime. Now, oil prices plunged after Tehran declared the Strait of Hormuz open for as long as the ceasefire holds. Now, with that development, would you say that we are really looking at a squeeze mentioned by the IEA director? Do you expect Europe to run out of jet fuel within weeks?
Yeah, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here with you. To be honest, I don't think that will be a shortage in jet fuel because, as you know, we know that the global fuel business, jet fuel, is about 7.8 million barrels per day. And Europe before the war was getting like 375,000 from the Gulf countries. Yeah, we totally agree that Europeans are missing the fuel we're getting from the Gulf countries. But we have to shed light on something very important. The United States today is increasing its supplies of crude oil and of jet fuel to Europe. And this is really, let's say, elevating the pressure on the European market. Sure, we will have, what we can expect in a few weeks, we'll have like prices will soar, prices will go higher, but to go in the shortage, I don't think so, because they have some alternatives, and one of the strongest alternatives they have the Russian, let's say, the crude oil from the United States, and they still have the Russian option also.
And Shoaib, could you please walk us through this? How do these disruptions in oil flows translate into an increase in jet fuel price so quickly?
Oh yeah, for sure. We have to bear in mind that since the start of the war in the Gulf countries, in the Strait of Hormuz, where situation there is very complicated and very complex, the global oil market is missing roughly 12 million barrels of oil per day. And we know that the oil we get from the Gulf countries are from light to medium. And we know from light to medium, we can get only like 10%, 8 to 10% of, let's say, of jet fuel. So now we have a big impact on the global fuel, and jet fuel and gasoline and diesel, not only Europe, but also Asia. So the impact is very deep. And I strongly believe that the problem will be not solved just after the end of the war. The problem will sustain longer because many facilities are out of service. Many refineries are out of service. So I strongly believe it takes at least 2 years to get back the pre-war production levels.
And Shoaib, at the start of our talk, you mentioned the United States and their supplies. If this pressure keeps on going here in the Strait of Hormuz, what are realistic alternatives for Europe to get its oil? Is U.S. viable?
Yeah, I think United States can help, but it can help. I think in a medium and long terms, it can help a lot. At the moment, it's like there will be a solution for the United States, but we can be not the fully alternative for European countries. As we know all, the oil and gas industry is a heavy industry. It needs planification, it needs long-term investments, and I think this not will be very easy for them. But anyway, United States, I think at the moment, is playing a crucial role to supply parts of its supplies or exports are going to Europe and even to Asia. But the main problem we're facing in upcoming weeks, that usually in the summer season, it's a travel season. We have more demand on jet fuel, on diesel and gasoline. So we have a double pressure. The pressure of the Strait of Hormuz and the pressure of, let's say, a travel season where we need more fuel, more gasoline. So that's why I think situation would be very complex. And the prices, I think, will not go down even in upcoming weeks. Situation maybe will ease starting from the Q4 if situation in Strait of Hormuz, if ceasefire will be permanently declared today or the upcoming days.
Looking at the bigger picture here, in moments of crisis like this, do the airlines take the brunt of the hit, or do these changes seep into the broader economy quickly as well?
Yeah, for sure. Let's say the aviation sector is highly impacted by this crisis. And many airlines have SIS, for example, KLM and KLM, for example, they have canceled many flights and because of price. So they increase the prices, but even you increase the price, that will be they can really cover your income. And it's very difficult situation. So what we are facing today is a big challenge, not for jet fuel, for the aviation, but for the cars, for the petrochemistry, for the fertilizer industry, for the helium, and many sectors. So the impact is very large. It's gripping the global economy. And the Strait of Hormuz, the problem of this strait, will impact not only the energy sector, all the sectors will be impacted. I think what we will face in the future also is inflation will increase in Europe, in Asia, in United States. But as we said, nobody can play the role of alternative. No one can replace the oil and natural gas of Gulf countries because they participate with very, very huge share in the globally. And I think because we know that more than 20% of the global crude oil pass through the strait. So it's not really easy to recover these volumes in a very short time.
And just finally, Shoaib, what are the things that you're watching for that tell you whether this crisis settles or becomes much more severe?
I think the impact, even though, as I said, even the war will stop today, the impact will be very long. So what Europeans should do today, I think, is to think about diversification. For example, to increase the share of natural gas in their system. They can use natural gas, for example, as a fuel in the cars and the big trucks. That could be an alternative. So I think they should put a new strategy, how to be immune about regarding what's really happening in the world, because we should remind everybody that we have also the war running in Ukraine. We have the problem in Strait of Hormuz. So we have different crises, wars are running at one time. So I think some actions, especially regarding our energy diversification, should be taken into account, especially have to shed light on natural gas, which can play a crucial role to be an immune, barrier for the European economy.
Shoaib, thank you kindly for coming on Primetime and sharing your insight.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Now, after the break, we will be taking a look at the UK transferring funds linked to frozen Russian assets to Ukraine and what it means for defense support. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. The United Kingdom has transferred around $1 billion in frozen Russian assets to Ukraine. Ukraine's finance ministry said the funds will address urgent needs in the country's security and defense sector. The latest payment is part of a broader agreement between the United Kingdom and Ukraine to provide Kyiv with about $3 billion for defense. Ukraine had previously received 2 tranches in March and April last year. Let's now bring in Cornelia Meyer, macroeconomist and chairman and CEO of Meyer Resources, joining us from Switzerland. Cornelia, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on the program. First off, how significant is this move of transferring funds linked to Russian frozen assets to Ukraine for its defense purposes?
Good evening, and thank you so much for having me. It is actually quite significant. What we had last year is, or what we have now is, Ukraine is running out of money to fund its defense. The US is no longer funding as they were funding under Biden. So now it's really up to the Europeans, and the UK is not part of the EU, but the UK is part of Europe, to find the money. So that's the backdrop against which it is. So it is significant. I'm sure the UK is very careful, the UK government is very careful. It's headed by a lawyer. They have looked and made sure that the way they did it is ironclad legally. The question is, what will it mean in future for the City of London? You may remember we had this problem late last autumn when it was the Euroclear several hundred million that were supposed to be going to the Ukraine, and Belgium said, no, we cannot do this. We cannot afford to have Euroclear embroiled into any sort of legal dispute, and we depend on actually central bank trusting us when we are the custodian of their money.
Well, from a macroeconomic perspective, does this set a precedent in how financial systems are being used in conflicts around the globe?
Well, it's less a macroeconomic perspective, it is more a legal perspective. So if I'm a central bank and I see that happen to another country, and you know, if I'm from a country where, you know, in not such an easy environment where you may have a war or disputes, then that will make me very wary of putting my money into the custody of such a country.
You've mentioned the case of Euroclear. We've heard at the time from the Belgian Prime Minister saying we cannot afford to have any sort of controversy. But there are still some concerns in some parts of the world about the financial stability and legality of such a move. How would you say this might affect confidence in Western financial institutions?
It will affect confidence, and it will affect confidence. Actually, the Belgians have done a good job at saying, no, we're not going to do this. But it will affect confidence in where, you know, people are taking the money that's in custody there, and other countries will look at that and say, well, how are we placed, and can things turn that they're adverse to us? So yes, it will have an impact. But then look, London is in Europe the strongest stock market, the biggest stock market. So the UK can probably afford more to do that than other countries, just because of the size and the breadth and the stability of the London stock market.
If this model were to expand, how would you say it might affect how countries manage their reserves and indeed where they choose to hold them?
They will not give them to countries or multinational organizations, multilateral organizations where these things occur. They will look, I mean, a lot of countries in Africa, in other difficult jurisdictions will look at that and say, well, how safe is my money there? Not how safe is my money there as a person, but how safe is my central bank's money there? So, so yes, it will have ramifications. People will look at that, and they will, in the long term, act on it. But on the other hand, you know, it's Europe is still a pretty stable environment, and usually we can rely on the rule of law. So they will have to weigh that.
And finally, Cornelia, would you say that this is a sustainable way to fund Ukraine, or does it carry with itself some long-term economic risks?
Well, I think it's not that sustainable. In the end, I'd like to see peace. I'd like to see peace everywhere and people stop dying. But it's not sustainable. And the issue is really the issue that we had the U.S. really footing a large bit of the bill, and the U.S. is now out with the new Trump administration. And at the same time, the Europeans would like to foot the bill, but they have economic difficulties in their own countries. And especially with what's going on Hormuz, the economic situation is materially and adversely affected. Growth is really affected. So it's a little bit a thing of, I don't think anybody really likes to do these things, but it's a thing of needs must.
Cornelia, thank you so much for coming on the program and sharing your insight.
Thank you very much indeed.
Russia has carried out one of its deadliest attacks on Ukraine this year, launching a large-scale barrage of missiles and drones across multiple cities. The strikes, which took place overnight on April 16th, came just days after a brief Easter ceasefire, highlighting how quickly the situation is escalating again.
Russia has launched one of its deadliest attacks on Ukraine this year, killing at least 18 people and injuring dozens in overnight missile and drone strikes across multiple cities. The assault hit the capital Kyiv, as well as Dnipro and the southern port city of Odessa, damaging residential buildings and critical infrastructure. In Kyiv, at least 4 people, including a 12-year-old child, were killed while dozens were wounded. Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said several of the injured, including emergency workers, were taken to hospital. Rescue teams also pulled a mother and child from the rubble of a heavily damaged apartment block.
It's just scary, that's all. I fear for our country and for everything we have. I feel so sorry for the children. So many people died today. Children died. It's so sad.
Elsewhere, at least 9 people were killed in Odessa and 5 in Dnipro, where strikes set residential buildings on fire. Ukraine's Air Force said Russia launched a large-scale barrage of ballistic and cruise missiles, along with hundreds of drones. While many were intercepted, several hit residential areas, causing widespread destruction. Meanwhile, in Russia, Ukrainian strikes on the Black Sea port of Tuapse reportedly killed a 14-year-old girl and a woman and damaged residential buildings. Kyiv said it targeted oil infrastructure, including facilities linked to Rosneft, as part of efforts to disrupt the Kremlin's war funding. The attack comes as Ukraine faces a critical shortage of air defense systems, particularly US-made Patriot missiles used to intercept ballistic threats. President Volodymyr Zelensky says the situation is at its worst. The latest violence follows a brief Easter ceasefire, with both sides accusing each other of violations. Efforts to negotiate an end to the war remain stalled, with Kyiv calling for a full ceasefire, while Moscow insists on broader peace terms first.
Well, let's now bring in Ognjen Petronijevic, a political analyst in Milan, Italy. Ognjen, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on Primetime. Let's start with the political impact of these latest strikes. How significant would you say they are, coming so shortly after that brief, challenged Easter ceasefire?
Good evening, and thank you so much for having me. Well, Russia launched one of the largest and deadliest waves of attacks in recent months. Politically, this suggests a very strong commitment of Moscow to continue with the war efforts and facilitate political and military dominance on the ground. During the ceasefire, what I would like to point out is the fact that both Russia and Ukraine were active in reinforcing their positions. Russia used the time of peace to stockpile drones and ballistic missiles that were later on used in strikes across Ukraine. On the other hand, President Zelensky used the period to tour around Europe and seek more air defense support and financial help, which highlights Ukraine's vulnerability. We must not forget that these strikes took place during the most recent change of leadership in Hungary, which will again unblock Brussels' decision-making and deliver the long-awaited 90 billion euros aid package for Ukraine. And Russia knows this, and it is the reason why they're trying to push the invasion in hope of breaking Ukraine before this financial aid actually arrives.
Would you say then that Moscow was sending a message with this massive air assault to Kyiv and its Western allies, and what would that message be then?
Oh, absolutely. The attacks signal, and first of all, military dominance of Russian side on the field. They, according to the reports of the Institute of Studies of War, they actually used over 300 drones, which 251 were actually Shahid-like drones, which are again either imported from Iran or designed based on Iranian blueprints. And they also approximately used 44 ballistic missiles aimed at exhausting Ukraine's air defense. Ukrainian forces managed to down most of the drones, but still struggled with intercepting those ballistic missiles, which again underlines the Ukraine's dire need for a system capable of countering these types of attacks, like Patriot actually is. As we heard before, Ukraine defense forces managed to continue their long-range campaign against Russian defense industrial infrastructure. They damaged facilities used for production of aviation fuel and jet fuel additives. In contrast, Russia attacked and targeted mainly civil, residential, and infrastructures and administrative buildings. The reason for that is probably because Russia wants to signal that they are trying to kind of create these issues in Ukraine regarding state functionality and everyday life. The functioning of the state becomes an important issue, and that is the reason why the future 90 billion euros EU loan will focus on both dimensions. So not only the military capabilities, but also strengthening government capacity.
Well, as we are waiting for Bratislava to get new leadership and get that 90 billion euro loan approved, we've seen another financial injection by the United Kingdom, who transferred around $1 billion using those funds from the frozen Russian assets. How do you say that transaction, that transfer feeds into the wider conflict?
Well, the UK's transfer of approximately $1 billion for Ukraine represents an effort to kind of bypass those legal restrictions that are present, let's say, in Europe. And they're mainly delivered through G7, Extraordinary Revenue Acceleration Initiative. This transfer is tightly linked to the announcement of the UK officials that they will deliver its largest ever drone package for Ukraine in 2026. This will consist of at least 120,000 drones, and they include thousands of long-range strike drones, logistic drones, intelligence, and maritime capabilities. Since UK is using frozen Russian assets, this also supports Ukrainian war efforts and facilitates the narrative of making Russia pay for the war. Still, $1 billion seems modest compared to some previous loans and also compared to the actual financial needs of Ukraine. I will have to remind you that USA alone under Biden administration between 2022 and 2025 provided $174 billion in aid. Moreover, Europe is preparing, as I already mentioned, 90 billion euros in aid for 2026 alone. Ukraine needs approximately 40 to 50 billion euros in external financing in 2026 just to keep the government running, due to the fact that 60% of Ukrainian domestic spending goes on military. Looking from this perspective, this loan seems almost insignificant and modest at best.
Does such kind of financial support go to shift the tide on the battlefield, do you think, or maybe just to provide some more sustainability for the Ukrainian both civil and military budgets?
The UK financial support will definitely not make much of a difference, let alone change the course of the war. It just highlights the dire need of Kiev to raise those offensive capabilities and being able to respond to Russian attacks. Ukrainian annual military budget needs tens of billions of dollars for Ukrainian forces to remain challenging on the ground. It appears that the strategy of the West right now consists of preventing the total collapse of Ukraine until those bigger loans pass all legal and intergovernmental procedures, like the one I mentioned earlier, the 90 billion euro aid package from Europe. That being said, the use of Russian frozen assets in this case could spark further conflict and maybe push Moscow into some retaliatory measures, like potentially seizing Western assets in Russia and accelerating the process of de-dollarization in international monetary relations.
And just finally, Ognian, at the start of our conversation, you spoke of Russia rearming itself during the respite. Do all of these developments suggest that both sides are perhaps preparing and digging in for a longer phase of the conflict? And in your mind, what would need to happen to signal any major change?
Andy, that is exactly what most recent events and reports suggest. Russia right now is focused on the long run. All of the mentioned financial tools that we mentioned today are just temporary in nature. And Moscow knows that, and they aim at exhausting all the reliable resources and then capitalizing in the coming years through, aggression, pure, sheer aggression. Unfortunately, peace is not on the horizon. What will potentially alter the conflict or the course of war is an active diplomatic role of Brussels and the United Kingdom in any future negotiations, which again demand much more leverage that Europe at this moment simply does not possess. What I also need to point out is that Europe needs to be sitting at the negotiating table and not be on one. Secondly, what will potentially make the difference in the financial is the financial support from Washington to facilitate both Ukrainian military and government capacity, which will potentially endanger some Russian territories, and this will enable Ukraine to gain enough leverage in any future peace talks. Still, under the current Trump administration and America First policy, this is just very, very unlikely to happen.
Well, Ognian, thank you so much for joining us on Primetime and sharing your insight and analysis. Now, after a short break, we will be checking in with our correspondents from all around the world for the latest developments from their regions. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Syria says it is positioning itself as a key transit hub for regional energy flows, offering new routes linking the Persian Gulf to Turkey and beyond. Adam Morrow has the details.
Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara said Syria is offering what he described as a safe corridor and alternative route for energy shipments across the region. Speaking to local state media during a visit to Turkey, al-Shara said connectivity was being enhanced between the Arab Gulf states and Turkey via Syria and Jordan. He made the remarks after arriving in Turkey to attend the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, which kicked off Friday and will continue through the weekend. Al-Shara noted that Iraqi oil is now being shipped through Syrian ports under a joint agreement between Damascus and Baghdad. He said the agreement reflected growing regional cooperation in the energy sector. In this regard, the Syrian leader highlighted the so-called 4 Cs project, a long-discussed initiative aimed at transforming the region into a major energy and transport hub.
What the world is seeking most urgently right now is security for supply chains and energy. This integration, linking Azerbaijan and the Caspian Sea, Syria and Turkey on the Mediterranean, and the Gulf's access to both the Red Sea and the Arabian Gulf, fits that need precisely.
Plans include the development of pipelines, railways, and road corridors designed to facilitate the movement of energy resources and goods across multiple regions. Advocates of the project say the initiative could significantly reduce reliance on traditional maritime choke points, such as the Strait of Hormuz. El-Shara stressed that such initiatives would serve to enhance regional connectivity and economic integration. His remarks come as regional countries explore alternative routes to ensure the uninterrupted flow of energy supplies at a time of increased geopolitical tensions. This is Adam Morrow for AnewZ in Istanbul, Turkey.
A quiet but politically charged diplomatic visit to Tbilisi is drawing attention across Europe as senior envoys from 3 key EU states arrive at a moment when Georgia's relationship with Brussels hangs in the balance. AnewZ's Nini Nikolaishvili brings more from Tbilisi.
A delegation from the Weimar Triangle countries, France, Germany and Poland held a series of high-level meetings in Tbilisi on April 16th, engaging with government officials, opposition leaders and civil society representatives in what appears to be a coordinated effort to assess Georgia's political trajectory and its strained ties with the European Union. The visit comes just days before EU foreign ministers are set to convene in Luxembourg, where Georgia is expected to be part of the discussion, a timing what adds weight to the delegation's fact-finding mission. On the government side, Foreign Minister Makabachardashvili emphasized regional security challenges and reiterated Georgia's priorities in maintaining stability, while European representatives reaffirmed their support for Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Officials described the talks as constructive, with Parliamentary Committee Chair Levan Mahashvili stressing that, despite differences, both sides see the dialogue as essential. At the same time, subtle tensions surfaced. Georgian officials raised concerns over what they described as inconsistencies in European messaging, including a prolonged technical error on Germany's foreign minister website referencing former President Salome Zurabishvili. Opposition figures and civil society groups painted a more critical picture. They highlighted democratic backsliding, controversial legislation, and what they see as a growing disconnect from European standards. For them, restoring relations with the EU depends on internal political normalization. Across all meetings, a common thread emerged. Communication has not broken down entirely, but trust has weakened. The delegation's decision not to comment publicly leaves room for interpretation, but with Luxembourg approaching, their findings may soon translate into clearer signals from Brussels on where Georgia stands and where it is heading. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, AnewZ.
China is stepping up calls for dialogue to ease tensions in the Middle East as concerns grow over regional stability and global security. For more on that, we go to Beijing and AnewZ's Mahnur Magdoum.
China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has called for the United States and Iran to return to the negotiating table, stressing that a political solution remains a top priority amid escalating tensions in the Middle East. Speaking during talks in Beijing with Italian Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani, Wang said that the conflict should never have happened and warned that its prolongation is already impacting global energy security and navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. He reiterated China's position in favor of resolving disputes through dialogue, describing Beijing as maintaining an objective and impartial stance while supporting mediation efforts, including those by Pakistan, and remaining engaged with all parties. Wang also highlighted growing global instability and called for stronger multilateral coordination, noting that China stands ready to work with Italy to safeguard international order and promote stability. Tajani, for his part, reaffirmed Italy's commitment to the One China policy and expressed support for closer coordination with Beijing in addressing regional and global challenges. Manu Maktoum, AnewZ, Beijing.
Iran has welcomed the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon with caution, calling it an integral part of the Iran-US negotiations deal. Tura Shiralilu sent us this report.
Iran has cautiously welcomed the 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, stressing that it is an integral part of Tehran's set of conditions for an end to the conflict with Washington. Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who headed Iran's negotiating team with the US in Islamabad last Saturday, said in a post on the social platform X that Iran will approach this ceasefire with caution and stands together until complete victory is achieved. Also, Foreign Minister spokesman Ismail Baghai, in a statement, welcomed the ceasefire between Tel Aviv and Beirut. He said that the cessation of the war in Lebanon was part of the ceasefire understanding between Iran and the United States, mediated by Pakistan. Both Ghalibaf and Baghai expressed Iran's gratitude over Pakistan's mediation efforts to establish the ceasefire in Lebanon as part of the Iran-US negotiations framework. Pakistan's Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir visited Tehran on Wednesday and Thursday, holding high-level talks with President Masoud Pezeshkian, Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. He also held a rare meeting with the commander of Khatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, Major General Ali Abdullahi. Tura Shiralilu, reporting from Tehran for AnewZ.
Turkmenistan and China have agreed on a new phase of development at one of Central Asia's largest gas fields, alongside plans to expand processing capacity and pipeline infrastructure. The deal comes as China remains heavily reliant on Turkmen gas supplies and looks to secure long-term volumes. Our correspondent Fariza Kalimurzina has the details.
China's state-owned energy giant CNPC and Turkmenistan's state company Turkmengas have signed an agreement to launch their fourth phase of development at the Galkonush gas field, alongside construction of a gas processing plant with an annual capacity of 10 billion cubic meters. Turkmengas chairman Maksat Babayev said the project will be financed from Turkmenistan's own resources. According to Reuters, the total cost is estimated at $5.1 billion. The deal comes as China continues to rely heavily on Turkmen gas delivered through the Turkmenistan-China pipeline system, which has been operating for more than 16 years. The network currently transports over 30 billion cubic meters annually through 3 lines, with a 4th line planned that would increase capacity to around 65 billion cubic meters per year. At the center of this cooperation is the Galkonush gas field, which also carries broader strategic significance. Beyond existing exports to China, it's seen as a potential supply base for future routes toward South Asia and possibly Europe via the Caspian Sea. And according to Britain's Geffnik Line, reserves at Galkonush and nearby structures are estimated at 27.4 trillion cubic meters, underlining the field's global scale and importance. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, AnewZ.
Trade turnover between Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan has reached $1 billion, marking a new milestone in bilateral economic relations. Savil Rajapova has more.
Trade turnover between Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan has reached $1 billion, reflecting the steady strengthening of economic and political ties between the two neighboring countries. The figure was highlighted this week during talks in Istanbul between the Speaker of the Kyrgyz Parliament, Marlen Mamaliyev, and Tanzila Narbayeva, chairperson of the Senate of Uzbekistan. The sides noted that finalization of border demarcation has played a key role in boosting bilateral trade. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, sections of the Kyrgyz-Uzbek border remain disputed, particularly in the densely populated Fergana Valley. A breakthrough came after high-level negotiations between Sadir Japarov and Shavkat Mirziyoyev, leading to a comprehensive agreement finalizing 1,476 kilometers of the shared border by the end of 2022. The deal included land swaps, joint management of the Kempirabat Reservoir, and the resolution of disputed sections, significantly improving border stability. Further progress was made in March 2025 with a trilateral agreement in Khujand, which helped finalize remaining boundary points and strengthened regional cooperation. Economic cooperation has shown strong growth in recent years. Trade turnover stood at around $846 million in 2024 and reached $1 billion over the past year. This growth reflects expanding trade volumes, diversification of goods, and deeper industrial cooperation. In addition to trade, both sides highlighted growing cultural and humanitarian ties, including an increase in tourism and people-to-people exchange. Officials stressed that improved border stability alongside expanding business cooperation, joint industrial projects, and better transport connectivity is creating conditions for further growth in both bilateral trade and long-term regional integration. It is Savil Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, AnewZ.
After a short break, we'll take you to the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, where leaders and policy makers are gathering, bringing you the very latest as discussions continue. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. The 5th Antalya Diplomacy Forum is underway in Turkey, with talks focused on turning dialogue into action and shaping a more stable and resilient global outlook. Here's more.
The Mediterranean city of Antalya is hosting representatives from more than 150 countries as global leaders gather for the 5th edition of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. The 3-day forum brings together heads of state, ministers, diplomats, and experts at a time of growing global uncertainty. More than 20 leaders, dozens of foreign ministers, and representatives from international organizations are taking part, alongside academics, business figures, and civil society. Organized by Turkey's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and supported by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the forum aims to address some of the world's most pressing challenges through dialogue and cooperation.
5 years ago, we set out with the goal of creating a global platform that would take the pulse of diplomacy. Today, we see that the Antalya Diplomacy Forum has become a shared platform for global wisdom, the world's conscience, and above all, hope for the future. I believe that the discussions to be held over the next 3 days will further highlight the forum's unique and distinctive character.
In his opening speech, Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan highlighted that while last year's discussions centered on the war in Gaza, attention is now turning to rising tensions involving Iran. He stressed that the immediate priority must be achieving a ceasefire, while warning that current conflicts could have far-reaching historical consequences. This year's theme, Mapping Tomorrow, Managing Uncertainties, reflects the need to better anticipate global risks and respond to rapid change. More than 40 panels and high-level sessions are scheduled, covering key issues such as the Russia-Ukraine war, ongoing tensions in the Middle East, and the crisis in Sudan. Organizers say the forum provides an important platform to rebuild trust and encourage dialogue at a time when international coordination is increasingly strained. Through panel discussions, bilateral meetings, and informal exchanges, leaders are working to identify practical solutions and share strategies.
The South Caucasus is stepping into sharper global focus as regional powers position themselves at the center of trade and energy routes, linking East and West. With new corridors taking shape, cooperation and competition are both intensifying.
The South Caucasus is emerging as an important partner in global supply chains and energy security. Assistant to the President of Azerbaijan, Hikmat Hajiev, said during the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, speaking at a panel titled South Caucasus, a strategic hub in the making, he pointed to the Middle Corridor project and noted that the Trump route, which is still under construction, is expected to increase regional trade and connectivity once completed.
It will be yet another strategically important connectivity route for bringing together Central Asia and Caucasus and European dimension. In a sense, we do also consider it like a four seas concept. Here from one side, we are building and linking Caspian Sea, Black Sea, Mediterranean, Adriatic Sea. Along that, we are also building cross-regional cooperation and partnership. And here, as we can see, that we are also applying the inclusive concept that seeing that Armenia as a transit country as part of the trip. On one segment of Azerbaijan's segment of the trip is almost ready. By the end of the 26th, we will finalize our work. On the Nakhchivan segment, we are working with our European partners and United States and Armenia and working bilaterally on the one segment here. Again,
Armenia's Deputy Foreign Minister, Vahan Kostanyan, said the benefits of regional infrastructure projects would extend beyond individual countries. He stressed that initiatives such as TRIP could support economic growth across the entire South Caucasus.
When the logistical chains and supply chains are disrupted everywhere, when there are ongoing wars, etc., etc. Now the stability that we have in the South Caucasus is the biggest competitive advantage that we have. But the destruction of these supply chains, for example, is not going to last forever. And we need to be smart enough and quick enough to materialize the competitive advantages that we have. Now we need to move forward with new political, very important decisions on opening of the communications in the region, creating additional interlinkages between our countries, but also becoming a bridge and unimpeded connectivity between Europe, Central Asia, Far East.
Akif Çağatay Kılıç, Chief Advisor on Foreign Policy and Security to Turkey's President, said Ankara is ready to support efforts that promote regional cooperation. He emphasized that countries in the region should act in solidarity and resolve challenges through internal dialogue.
Have to be resolved by regional.
President of Syria's transitional government has used an appearance at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum to push for de-escalation in the region and a return to diplomacy. President Ahmed al-Shara has welcomed efforts to secure a ceasefire in Lebanon after U.S. President Donald Trump announced a truce between Lebanon and Israel. Speaking at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, al-Shara said he hoped the region could now move away from further escalation. He said Syria wants stability across the Middle East and warned that any deeper fallout involving Iran would affect the wider region.
We were pushing for this war not to break out in the first place, also because Iran is a country with a population of about 85 million people, and any harm that befalls Iran from within could affect the region in general. We are pushing for a stable region and for its problems to be resolved through dialogue and diplomacy.
Well, the first day of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum has wrapped up, bringing together leaders from across the region at a pivotal moment. From high-level speeches to rare regional dialogue, the focus is already shifting to what comes next. AnewZ's Katie Wilson reports from Antalya.
Well, there we have it. The first day of the 5th Antalya Diplomacy Forum has just wrapped up, and what a day it was. We had opening remarks from both the President and the Foreign Minister of Turkey. We've heard from world leaders such as the President of Syria and the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, and the day has just wrapped up with a panel focusing on the South Caucasus. Now, in attendance at that panel were representatives from not only Georgia, Turkey, but representatives from both Azerbaijan and Armenia. And both ministers pointed out the significance of that. Of course, this is the first Antalya Diplomacy Forum since the Washington agreements in August, and they pointed out what a game changer that was, and that they're sat together at this panel discussing issues which concerns all South Caucasus countries, such as energy security and more localized issues like Armenia's upcoming elections and potential EU enlargement concerning Georgia and Armenia. So there's been lots happening today. There's been a lot to chew on, and this was only the first day. It continues for 2 more days, and of course I'll bring you all of the latest developments as new lines come about. But for now, this is Katie Wilson and Elbrus Masayev from Antalya in Turkey.
Now to some other news. A community initiative in Syria is giving families a place to honor relatives killed or still missing after years of violence. Through tree planting and personal memorials, the project is aimed at preserving the names and stories of those who never returned.
In a suburb of Damascus, families are planting trees to remember civilians killed or still missing after years of conflict in Syria. The project, called Fig Gardens, turns grief into a living memorial. Each tree is dedicated to a victim, with names and photographs placed beside newly planted saplings. Founder Ammar Jabir says the initiative honours civilians lost over decades and is meant to preserve their stories for future generations.
Each tree is planted in memory of a civilian victim. We are honouring lives lost from 1970 to December 8, 2024. This is the 3rd garden under the initiative, and we want to take the project to more places across Syria.
The Daraya site is the 3rd garden created under the project, which organisers hope to expand to other parts of Syria. The garden gives many families a place to express grief after years of unresolved loss. Participant Hannah Hadler says she lost 9 relatives, including her son, who disappeared in detention in 2013.
Nothing can replace the ones we lost. This tree was planted for my son and for all those who are gone. There is great sorrow inside us, and this is how we express our feelings.
For the families involved, the garden stands as both a memorial and a call not to forget those who never came home.
Myanmar's new president approved an amnesty for 4,335 prisoners, including former President Win Myint. The report also mentioned commutation of death sentences to life, life sentences to 40 years, and term reductions by 1/6 for other prisoners, without elaborating. According to the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, more than 30,000 people were detained on political charges since the military, led by Min Aung Hlaing, staged a coup against an elected government in 2021. Nearly 900 Rohingya refugees were reported missing or dead in 2025 after attempting sea crossings in the Andaman Sea and Bay of Bengal, making it the deadliest year on record for the route. The report was made by the United Nations Refugee Agency. According to the agency, more than 1 in 7 of around 6,500 people who attempted the journey last year were either missing or confirmed dead. The crossings remain part of a wider crisis, with Rohingya continuing to risk overcrowded and unsafe boats in search of safety. Now to film, and CinemaCon in Las Vegas has taken place, bringing Hollywood studios and cinema owners together. At this event, there were a host of celebrities to preview upcoming movies for the big screen. Here's more.
The annual Las Vegas CinemaCon event, held at Caesars Palace, began earlier this week on Wednesday and continued through Thursday, with industry figures gathering to promote the upcoming summer releases. Stars including Nicole Kidman, Tom Cruise, Zendaya and Timothée Chalamet appeared on stage to present their latest projects as studios unveiled trailers and exclusive footage. The major film industry trade event aims to bring together Hollywood studios and cinema owners, where decisions are made on what will be shown in theatres over the coming year. On Wednesday, cinema executives and analysts highlighted the importance of the event in generating anticipation for the busy film season ahead.
Well, let's remember, one of the things that we're here to do is to celebrate movies and to get people excited for the upcoming movie season. You know, usually the kickoff of the summer is in May, end of April, beginning of May. It used to be the end of May, now it's sort of the end of April, beginning of May. But as we kick off into summer, the idea of coming together and celebrating the movies and bringing the stars, and that drives coverage and media coverage, and so that's good for the movies, and it's what makes movies an important part of the entertainment ecosystem.
A wide range of films were screened, from major sequels and action titles to family animations and comedies, raising expectations for a strong year at the box office.
Yeah, I think this is going to be the biggest summer since the pandemic, with an incredible variety of films, kicking off with The Devil Wears Prada 2, Mandalorian and Grogu on Memorial Weekend. Then you've got Christopher Nolan's Odyssey, Steven Spielberg's Disclosure Day, two big animated family films with Minions and Monsters and Toy Story 5. So I just think, front to back, this is going to be one of the best summers for movie theaters ever.
CinemaCon wrapped up after a couple of days of presentations aimed at drawing people back into cinemas.
Well, that's our show for tonight. Thank you so much for watching and stay tuned to AnewZ.